Good evening. Thank you all for coming. So I'm Peter Tufano, the Dean of the school. If you're not from Said Business School, welcome to the school, and welcome to this Distinguished Speakers Seminar by Ann Ziff. Let me put this in context. Tonight we're going to talk about art and the arts in business. Now, that goes both ways. People think that business is a science, but as those of you who are studying at the business school know, or any of you have actually done business, there is more of an art to doing business, as much, or at least there's as much of an art to doing business as there is a science. And that art is about creativity, that art is about motivating people, that art is about bringing your passion into the workplace. But then there's a business of art as well. And the art business, whether it's the opera business or the music business or the galleries business or whatever, also has a business element. And therefore you have to worry about how it is that you run an arts organization or a cultural organization. So this interplay between arts and business is we're going to explore tonight with Ann Ziff. Ann is has been in this space of understanding how it is that arts organizations run for a long time and is one of the prime movers in the arts world around the world. She's the chairman of the Metropolitan Opera. She's the vice chairman of Lincoln Center. She's the founder and producer of the Caribbean Community Theater in St. Croix, and many other things, but I just want to bring out one. How many of you are MBAs and have seen or played the piano in the common room? Okay. Do you know the story about the piano in the common room? Let me tell you the story. So there's a great organization called Sing for Hope. Ann happens to be on the board. Sing for Hope, which is created by Muhammad Yunus's daughter, Monica, and some partners. And maybe you can talk about more what Sing for Hope does at some point, uses music to bring people together. And so at the Skoll World Forum a few years ago, Sing for Hope and Monica was here, and they both performed and also kind of talked about Sing for Hope. On the piano in the common room, if you look at it, you'll see hopes about the future. And everybody at the Skoll World Forum, or everybody who wanted to, wrote on the piano about what they were thinking about and their hopes for the future. At the end of the Skoll World Forum, I cheekily went up to Monica Yunus and said, "What you doing with that piano?" Because one of the students had said in the breakfast, "Would it be nice to have a piano at the business school?" And at the time we didn't have one. So I said, "Can we keep it?" And she said, "Sure." And that's how we got the piano that's in the common room. And that's a long way back to, but that organization is supported and funded by many people, and it requires an engaged board. And so in addition to all the other things at the Metropolitan Opera and the Lincoln Center, one of the many other boards that Ann sits on is Sing for Hope. And Sing for Hope sits in our common room. So those of you, when you bang out a few tunes on the keys, can maybe thank Ann along with some other folks. So patronage has always been an important part of the arts, and I want to also use this opportunity to announce a new piece of patronage, which is that I'm delighted to announce a new scholarship here at the business school. And this is a scholarship program for UK students who want to work in the UK arts, heritage, and cultural sectors. The Linbury Scholarship will fund 3 students a year to the value of £55,000 each, and it will support applicants to both the MBA and the executive MBA programs. This was funded by the Linbury Trust, established by the Lord Sainsbury, Preston Candover, and Lady Sainsbury. Then this is a pretty great scholarship. So as we think about tonight, business and the arts and how it is that we might bring an arts approach to business and also a business approach to the arts, we're grateful tonight to the Linbury Trust and the Sainsburys for, in the future, supporting students to come here and do just that. But tonight, what we're particularly blessed with is Ann Ziff, who's come over from New York to join us to talk about philanthropy and board governance. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ann. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to first say that it's really humbling and inspiring to be here at Oxford. For the last couple of days, I've been fortunate enough to tour some of the colleges, and I found myself dreaming that I was hoping by magical osmosis some of this brilliance would stick to me. It's truly a humbling experience to be here and an honor, so thank you. As you heard, our topic today is philanthropy and board governance, which invariably includes fundraising. It also includes the general question of volunteerism and the experience of serving on boards. various large, small, nonprofit cultural organizations. How does one get started in this? How do these boards work? And why is America such a philanthropic country? I've been asked to give a little background, biographical information, just as an explanation of how I got here and why I'm here. And I thought I should also talk a bit about the progression I went through to end up where I am today. And truly, I don't know that it's a unique experience that I had, but I never imagined, ever, that I would be doing as much of this kind of work as I do today, or standing in front of such an august crowd. I was born and raised in New York City. My father was born in what is now the Slovak Republic. It was the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, a long time ago. And he went to America at the age of 5. He was a Golden Gloves boxer and made his way through Yale Medical School, boxing professionally. He became an old-fashioned doctor who did house calls in New York City, which was very unusual at that time. My mother was American, back many generations. As a matter of fact, her great-grandfather was the first white boy, which is to say non-American Indian, born in the state of Iowa in the Midwest. She became an opera singer and went to Europe in 1927, stayed there singing until 1939. She was pretty famous and sang in most of the major opera houses in Europe at that time. She was also pretty cheeky and headstrong, and when Hitler asked her to sing for him, she refused. But she stayed on in Europe anyway for several years and continued singing. Since you basically did not refuse the Fuhrer or anything, that was quite an example for me to grow up with. She returned to America and sang at the Metropolitan Opera. And I suppose I was hooked on opera and the arts and classical music from a very early age. I studied piano from the age of 5, but I really was not talented. And I knew I'd never achieve any kind of excellence. So I went to university and got a good old liberal arts degree, which trained me to do absolutely nothing in particular but broaden my mind. After university, I returned to New York City, and a cousin of mine was working at Ziff Davis Publishing Company. She told me I'd love the world of magazine publishing. So I got a job as a secretary, and in those days we were all called secretaries, not assistants, but it's exactly the same job. And within 2 years, I was moved up to the office of the chairman and owner of the company, Bill Ziff. You can tell by my last name, it was a pretty wise move. I quit working and went back to graduate school, first in the field of music therapy. But again, I realized I wasn't a real talented musician, and it was not the right thing for me. So I switched to the social work program and got a master's in psychiatric social work and worked in the New York City welfare system. But my husband had 3 little boys, and he was running a big company, so I quit work. It was the end of my social work career and the beginning of being on boards and the start of me understanding philanthropy. When we talk about philanthropy, people generally think of financial ability and making donations. But you can and should be philanthropic with your time as well. That's what being on boards like I am is all about. I live in the most philanthropic country in the world, and New York City is arguably the most philanthropically generous city on the planet. I've been asked in other countries about this, in France and Russia, and the question is always, how can they make their citizens more philanthropic toward their own great cultural institutions? Perhaps a little frame of reference is helpful here. Back in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries and earlier, throughout Britain, Europe, Russia, and China, the great collections were being amassed. Huge palaces and grand estates were being built, which would house them. They were built by the kings, the queens, the czars, the emperors, the rich royalty of those nations for their own personal enjoyment, and basically, often in their own residences. These palaces eventually became the great museums of those countries and were supported first by royalty and then eventually by the government. When America was a fledgling country, our example of what we wanted for this new nation of ours was basically the British and the European model. That is, after all, where we all came from to colonize America. We wanted some of the same great megacultural institutions ourselves, just like the ones we knew were back in Britain and Europe. But in America, the great museums and collections, the concert halls, the opera houses had to be dreamed up, created, and built by our own wealthy citizens, the hyper-wealthy robber barons of the 1800s. I'm sure you recognize those names, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, the Mellons, the Rockefellers. And thus philanthropy itself was born in America well over 150 years ago and continues to this day. It's basically in our American DNA. It's really part of our heritage. Perhaps it's something you can learn, something you can teach, but we're really born with it, and it's the way our country was born. Since the people of Britain, Europe, Russia, China, and now, of course, the Middle East, are used to the government paying for and supporting these cultural institutions, it's not easy to ask citizens to give money to something that they've taken for granted and been given for generations. Giving of our time and resources is who we are as Americans. And I'll give one rather moving example here. I started a charity in the late 90s called the Smile Train. We provide funds for free cleft lip and cleft palate surgeries in third world countries performed by local doctors that we have trained. A surgery and full aftercare costs just $250 to change a child's life. To date, we've done more than 1 million surgeries in over 75 countries, and we were able to secure free full-page advertisements in magazines and newspapers. Because of those ads, we received countless unsolicited donations. And I can't tell you how many of those donations, sometimes $10, $15, came from prisoners across America who had seen those ads. That's really in our tradition. I grew up with an understanding of giving your time because both of my parents were prime examples. My parents were married in June of 1942. My father was 42 years old at the time, but he volunteered for the Army to be a doctor on a ship in the Mediterranean campaign and stayed there for the last 3 years of the war. My mother had been a fairly well-known opera singer and concert singer, and she became a Gray Lady. And the Gray Ladies were volunteers who helped in hospitals and worked as an extension of the American Red Cross. So from the time I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to give of my time somehow. Being on nonprofit boards is, of course, volunteering your time. And with joining a board comes a lot of obligations, not just your time, but financial obligations. Whether in hospitals, universities, large or small cultural institutions, wherever, it can be a tremendously rewarding experience. But what can also occur, especially in some of the bigger, well-known institutions, is that some people want to be on a board in a way to just gain credentials for themselves. I started out only wanting to volunteer my time and didn't feel the need to formally be on any of these boards. I was naive enough not to realize that I had the right last name. My husband was rather well known at the time, and that those asking me to join their boards wanted me to be on their board. So initially, I got roped in, and I've been there ever since. And I think my progression here might be instructive. The first board I joined was the Rainforest Alliance back in the mid-'80s. They had asked my husband to join, but he was running a huge company, had no time, and said no. So they decided on second fiddle, and they got me. And that was the first board I was on. I became the chairman, and I was chairman for 8 years. At that time, the budget was $1 million. And beginning that way, I could learn all about boards, about board governance, about all of the problems, because all the problems are the same on larger boards and in larger organizations. It's just that now I'm running one that has a lot more zeros at the end of our budget numbers. For example, the Metropolitan Opera and I'm chairman there still, our budget last year was $300 million. And we have to raise over $150 million every year just to break even and open the doors. The challenges are the same, they're just a whole lot bigger. I think there are a number of reasons why people join boards, and most importantly, it should be because they have interest and passion about the organization. They believe in the missions and the goals and the programs. Hopefully, it's to give of their time and expertise in ways that the organization needs. Sometimes it's to gain prestige. All of these boards should self-evidently be constituted of like-minded people. Like-minded in terms of the organization's boards and goals, but not necessarily like-minded in terms of their personal lives, and often not like-minded in terms of their politics, especially today in America. And when the organization is small, like the Rainforest Alliance was when I joined, the financial requirements are very small. The larger the organization, the larger the financial requirements. In a small startup charity, that requirement may be as small as $5,000. When an organization grows, the commitment requirements change and increase with it. Most of the large nonprofit institutions that I'm on the boards of in New York and Los Angeles have a requirement of $100,000 to $500,000, depending on the board level. And some of these organizations also require that within the first few years of board service, you give a capital donation, which is often as much as $5 million. So you can see how a lot of people are not able to be on those boards. When you're recruiting a board member, you inform him or her of the financial obligations, the length of the term, the meeting requirements, etc. You also have a discussion of their interests and what they hope to be able to contribute in terms of time and expertise. The boards of all the large institutions I've been on really recruit in very similar ways. We look for people with financial means, of course, and of different professions. We analyze the male-female percentage on the board, the age distribution, geographic representation, nationality, and race distribution. And as a matter of fact, the mayor of New York just started requiring all of these large boards and institutions in New York to be more racially diverse. And that's a very difficult thing to do, although we're trying. I know you're all trying to do it in your colleges too. It's not so easy. Some nonprofits managing boards have more than 80 people, and that can certainly be unwieldy. And regarding professions, you really want very different professions represented. Lawyers, bankers, hedge fund managers, if possible, people from the film industry, the real estate industry, advertising industry, pharmaceutical industry, whatever. What this gives you is not just different areas of knowledge and expertise, but different populations to draw upon for future board members and to broaden your donation base. With performance arts organizations, we also hope it broadens our audience. If your board is as large as 80, it's a very difficult board to work with. But most of the in-depth discussions, the actual work in all of these boards is done by an executive committee. And that committee is usually 10, 12, sometimes it's, for a very large board, might be 20, but it's always a much smaller group. And that group meets virtually every month. All of the intense discussions go on in that group, and then those issues are presented to be voted on by the whole board. Of course, the responsibility of the board is the financial health and the proper oversight of the business and running of the organization. And one of the frequent misconceptions is that board members should have influence on the programming itself, whether it's planning a future exhibition if it's a museum, or developing a conservation program, or whether it's deciding what the next new opera is going to be at the Opera House. Programs and activities are decided upon by experts who are hired for those positions within the organization. But sometimes a board member who makes a significant financial contribution thinks that it gives them the right and opportunity to make programmatic or artistic decisions. It can sometimes be a very sensitive and difficult situation. I'll digress for a moment to give one example. On one of the large boards I was on, someone approached us, wanted to be on the board, and said they would give us an initial $10 million donation. No one knew this person very well, so we had to search around for people who'd worked with him and who knew him well. The information from several sources was the same. He was a difficult person to deal with. He insisted on getting his own way. He was disruptive in board meetings, and he frequently reneged on his financial promise. So while a prospect of a $10 million gift, which is a huge gift no matter how big the organization is, was very enticing, we made the decision that it wasn't worth trying to put him on the board. On any philanthropic board, with everyone's time being donated, there are always some who turn out to be real worker bees and some that really contribute nothing. They end up seldom coming to meetings and start failing to make the required financial donation. That's when you make the decision to remove them, which is not such an easy thing to do. I think there are many areas we could address in more detail here, and I'm hoping you have questions for me. Length of term of service, having a policy of rotating off the board. A lot of boards are very different in that regard. And board recruitment, which is crucially important. But as equally important is getting people off the board if they're not fulfilling their obligations. And that can be pretty tricky because there's some pretty important, maybe self-important people who really want the credentials, and you have to try to get them off the board to make room for others. Of course, we can address the issue of fundraising, which we're all in the middle of all the time. How do you fundraise? Who should do it? Everybody is not cut out to fundraise. It's not very easy. And well, I think there are lots of other questions, but I think I'll open it up to all of you for discussion or reactions. I probably won't have the answer to all the questions you're going to ask me, but I'll find it out and I'll get back to you. Thank you.
If you can introduce yourself and ask a short question, that would be great. And I think you can take the
Yes.
I'm just a member of the public with an interest in the arts. How much say does the board governors and boards that you're involved in have in the choice of chief executive and also artistic director, or the main artistic person in the organisation?
Almost always a special committee is formed, and it will be of top management. It would probably be the board chair and the president and the CEO and one or two other top board members. And they would be on the committee that would do all of the interviews. Then it would go to the executive committee to be okayed. But it's really a very small group of people that make those decisions. And for instance, at the Metropolitan Opera, I would have nothing to do with the choice of the next artistic director. That's not why we're on the boards. That's not our field. For an executive director, certainly.
So who decides about the artistic director?
That would be the present general manager and the artistic department, which would probably be a handful of 2 to 4 people.
Hi, I'm Ahmad. I'm an MBA student here. I'm from Egypt. So I just wanted to ask you, in certain parts of the world, how could you form an institution where it could be, to an extent, and the impact it delivers unbiased and could scale up, while dodging through the attempts of political influence that could make the organization a little bit unbiased or politically involved?
Boy, that's tough anywhere, whether it's in a smaller country or in New York. Whenever you get anything involved with politics, it's it's almost impossible to satisfy everybody. And you'll start with a few people trying to set up the organization, and you hope they're like-minded. But invariably, if you get some people 180 degrees in opinion, you're going to have a hard time setting that up. I don't know if that answers the question, but probably you would want to start with half a dozen like-minded people who really believe the same thing. Try to start something and then see where it goes. Not easy. If you have something in your mind, it's not going to be an easy task.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Christine Fairchild. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for the university. And I'm curious about any tips that you might have with regards to deflecting those people. You described somebody, a potential board member who was clearly not a good fit, had a great appetite, but was for all the wrong reasons, and clearly was not a good fit. What were your tips for moving that person along or managing to preserve some relationship there?
In this case, it was easy because we didn't want to preserve the relationship. We didn't have a relationship, and we didn't want to establish one. I think it's more difficult if it's someone that is giving you a lot of money and wants to be on the board, and every instance is different. We had a situation like that on one of my boards where a couple was divorced. The money was from the female side, but the man married someone else who was interested in being on our board, and we couldn't let him have his wife be part of it because the huge donations were coming from his ex-wife. And it took a lot of hand-holding.
So are you actively explaining the awkwardness of the situation to the individual, or how do you?
In that case, he knew what the situation was, so a number of us had to take him to operas and do a lot of power schmoozing to keep him on board. And there's a lot of that goes on. But I think every case is so different. Yes?
Jonathan Phillips, Warden of Keble. I'm fascinated by this story. I just wonder, in broad terms, if we take the Met as obviously your central responsibility, in terms of refreshing, renewing the board, what proportion of appointments are from people who come up to you and say, the thing I really want to do is be on your board at the Met, as opposed to people whom you've identified as really helpful and useful to you, whom you go out and encourage?
I think that goes in spurts. I've been on the board of the Met almost 24 years, and Lincoln Center for 20 years, and I'm nominating committee on both. And every once in a while you're lucky enough so someone with the means comes up to you and you think they'll be good for your board and you can just accept them. Most of the time you're looking for people who have some interest in what you're doing, and you're looking at their bank accounts because everything's available now. It's much easier, for instance, for us to recruit for Lincoln Center because there are 11 different constituents. The Metropolitan Opera is the largest and one of them. But you don't have to like anything about classical music. You can like film, or you can like jazz, you can like the Performing Arts Library. With the opera, you have to find someone who really likes opera. So it depends on the board, and you want to find someone that you can find an interest in. In most of these organizations, we all have a big educational component. Some people are only interested in education, something you're all familiar with here. And so you try to find the program in the Met or at Lincoln Center that really deals with education and getting to younger school kids, build a program from them, and try to get them involved that way. You just have to get into what they're really interested in. I would say a very small percentage come to us.
May I have a second? So, accepting that, which is highly informative, what's your general advice? And I know that each case is different, but what's your general advice? You've identified a group of people who you think would be great board members, but in this context, the deal is they've got to pay a substantial amount of money for that privilege. How long is the courtship
Well, sometimes it's one lunch, and then you feel very lucky. And other times it's a year and a half, and you've taken them to very expensive dinners and operas 6 times or 8 times or more before they really get interested. And sometimes you do that 6 times, 8 times, 10 times, and you realize they're just doing it to be courted, and you're not going to get $1,000. Yes.
Hey,
Yes.
my name is Kevin Moore. I'm an MBA student here. In the wake of the financial crisis, arts organizations are really struggling as corporate giving diminished. I think a city opera is going under, and Philadelphia Orchestra, which had a ton of money, failed. How did you adjust your governance to make the Met so successful? I think of like in the late 2000s, there was the increase in the live streaming of shows, but what did you have to change about the way you operated in the light of the financial crisis?
Well, you try to cut back on your budget, for instance, and in 2014, our budget was $327 million, and our budget for this coming year, it's $280 million. Now, for all you MBA people, you can do the math. That's a huge percentage drop in your budget. You lose a lot of your big donors at that time, which we did, and we lost some board members, and you just have to hope that you can find new ones. It's as simple as that, because some of the board members give you as much as $1 million a year, and they support a production. Same at Lincoln Center, same at the Natural History Museum. All of the big boards are the same. And the more you lose, the more you have to work harder and find some new money. Yes.
I'm Sharika. I'm a banker, a consultant, and an entrepreneur. I have 2 questions. One is, how do you check for money laundering when somebody actually wants to come and give you X amount of cash? And I'm drawing on a question from Jonathan Vidal on when you're actually pursuing a donor, for example. You take entertainment and those sort of things. What is the policy? Because at the end of the day, this is money public use or for specific use, right? How would you draw on policies on how much money can be used for these sort of things without actually making sure that you get the benefit that you want?
There's, in any of these organizations, large or small, there is a development budget. And you have so much you can spend per year for outreach and for courting and that sort of thing. And when you run out of that money, you shouldn't spend any more. I mean, for something like the Metropolitan Opera, it's a large budget. For something like Carnegie Hall, it's not as large, but it's a good-sized budget. Regarding money laundering, I've never come across that. I guess they're not interested in the arts. Yes.
Hi, I'm Elaine Gallagher, and I'm Head of Development for the Bodleian Libraries. Can I ask you how you think that the board and the Development Office work best together? What are the best examples of good practice of that successful relationship of the Development Office supporting the board and the most collaborative and best relationships, and how to achieve those?
The job of the Development Office should be to do the research on prospects for joining the board and prospects for getting involved. And the better the research that you as the Development Office gives me, the better I'll be able to do my work. The more you can find out about each one of your prospects. What is it that they're interested in? You know, everybody can look at the Forbes 400. They know everybody's bank account in that regard. What are they really interested in? And that's, and the Development Office should work directly with the board on all of that. And that's, we have a great development office at Lincoln Center and at the Met, and most of the big organizations do. But it's feeding us, the board members, with the right information before we have that meeting with whomever it is.
And do you have regular meetings the development office do? Is it more ad hoc, or is there a set?
We don't have regular meetings with the development department. It's usually one-on-one, or if we're getting ready to have a meeting with some prospect, there'll be someone from the development office that will feed us the information. But it's not, the board generally doesn't meet fully with the development department. Yes.
Deborah Daliesi, I'm a development manager with Massey Business School in New Zealand. Just really interested in how, when you have an existing board who have never embraced it philanthropically themselves, you change that culture. Any suggestions on how you approach the existing board?
That's been happening in New York over the last 25, 30 years. For instance, when I joined the board of Lincoln Center, there wasn't a specific requirement of financial obligation to join that board. We realized that some people weren't giving any money, and we realized we had to change our bylaws. So some of the people that were on the board for a long time, it's very difficult to get them off, especially if they're of some great stature. And sometimes you forego that obligation for them. But you change it so everybody coming in realizes it's now $250,000 a year if you want to be a board member. But it's a very slow changeover because you don't want to kick off all your board and they can't afford it. And sometimes you ask people to come on the boards because they're a celebrity or they have a certain skill set or they can add something. And then you have to make an exception that they don't have to do the 100,000, 200,000 requirement. But that's also very tricky because if someone else coming on the board wants the exception to be made for them, you don't want people to know what exceptions you've made. And so I'd say if there is no obligation on a board you're thinking about now, it's going to be tough to get them to start paying. Long and slow and painful. Yes.
So I have a question you just sort of began to address in that last answer. I'm Sally Maitlis, I'm a professor here at the school. And I was just very struck at the inherent challenge of needing board members to bring a lot of money to the table and yet also needing to create more diversity in your boards and how that's possible. And so I suppose I'm wondering from what you've just said, do you make exceptions in those cases?
We have made exceptions on a number of boards that I'm part of. And we knew at the time that whatever the nationality was, that whatever the race was, that they weren't going to be able to pay for that. And you have a private discussion with that person, and because they really have something to add. But you don't let more than a few people know that you've made. But that's why it's going to be very difficult because Mayor de Blasio has just made this requirement that we have to be more racially diverse. And I'm not sure how we're going to do it because all of the big cultural institutions and the universities and the hospitals, everything we're talking about in America relies on these large donations. And there are very few racially minorities that can pay that much. I don't know how we're going to end up. This just started, and we'll see what he does if we can't.
To what degree does the board, say, of the Metropolitan Opera control expenditure? I mean, does the artistic team come to you and say, right, next season this is what we would like to do, and therefore this is your task to fundraise? Or do you go to the artistic team and say, right, this is what we're capable of raising, and therefore tailor your program according to the funds that we're capable of providing you?
Well, we've been in this, having dropped almost $47 million off our budget. It's been a very difficult process, but none of us we know what we're going to have to raise. Basically $300 million budget. We have to raise $150 million, and we're cutting it back. But we can't tell them what to do and what to cut because none of us know how much the next production is going to cost. And none of us know if you drop 2 rehearsals from the next Così fan tutte, are you going to suffer? If you drop 10, you know you're going to suffer. If you drop 1.5, and that takes a huge team of people. We have 2,000 employees at the Metropolitan Opera. It takes a huge team who really understands every one of those details to cut the budget down. And they generally tell us, yeah, we can cut it by 5 million, and then we try to fit things into certain slots. We dropped one new production this year because it was going to be too expensive. I mean, you do that several years in advance. But again, it's not the board that has anything to do with the artistic decisions. We're told what they would like to do and how much that part of it will cost. And then we're given the job of trying to raise that money. I don't know if that is enough of an answer. Yes.
Hi, I'm June, current MBA student. Actually, I went to law school at Fordham Law School right next to Lincoln Center, and I lived there for 8 years. So, and personally, I have been involved with all the lots of organizations you mentioned here. I'm a young fellow for the American Natural Museum History, young fellow for ABT, and young fellow for Free Collection, and also on the host committee of Morgan Library and Museum.
Wow.
So, seeing you here.
Listen to that, all you students.
Seeing you here really made me feel like I'm still in New York. So, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. I kind of look through your bio here, and I noticed kind of you chose to be on the board of several very established charity, and also you chose a few new initiatives, such as Lang Lang International Music Foundation. Actually, I'm a personal friend with Lang Lang, and we come from the same hometown actually. So also a few other smaller, not means not significant, but smaller, those kind of charity organizations. So when you pick those charity organizations, you actively pick them, or they happened by accident or because of friends in that circle, and you join those organizations. So it's more you took the initiative, or more it happened by accident. And also for us, for example, I was while I was in New York, I was asked to join a few junior board, and at that time I personally feel I only have so much time, and I have a full-time job as a lawyer in New York, so I do not know how to say which one I really want to join, and which one I say, oh, probably not right now, but I still want to keep the relationship going. So what's your advice for our generation, how we choose those charities?
I understand the question. I'm a visiting professor at Temple University in Philadelphia, and one of the sessions last year was about volunteerism, and it was just all young students, undergraduates and graduates. And basically, I think whoever it is, whether it's me or it's a student, figure out what it is you're really interested in, because if you're giving your time, you want to give your time, and time is the most precious thing we have. You want to give your time for something that you're really interested in, whether it's music or it's sports or it's children's or it's disease or whatever it is, and volunteer and find out what you're interested in. For us old folks who've been around for a long time, I think we also have to pick what really interests us most. I would never join something just because somebody said, please join it. I'm asked to join boards all the time. And it has to be something that's going to hit my heart, or something where I think I can make a difference. I certainly can't make a difference in every board I join, even if I said yes to all of these boards. I don't have the right skill set for every board. But love what you're giving your time to. Don't get seduced into doing something because somebody important asks you to do it, because I think you end up being dissatisfied in that regard. Yes.
My name's Helen Mealins, and I work for a small charity based in Oxford. I'm quite interested in charity law and board governance arrangements in the United States. Here we have the Charity Commission, who governs the charity sector, and there is a body of law, and there are codes of conduct, a recently produced code of conduct for charities. Could you say a little bit more about what the arrangements are institutionally for governing boards in America and how they differ? And my second question is whether there are any tax breaks associated with the charitable, the philanthropic donations that go to charities, and whether that's legislated for as it is.
It's always, all the donations are always legislated, and we have great tax advantages for giving donations, and we're always worried when someone's coming into office who says they want to cut down on those tax advantages, because every one of our institutions depends on philanthropy. We don't have government support. I mean, even in a museum like the Natural History Museum, they get about $5 million from the city on a $200 million budget, and the museum of the Metropolitan Museum gets a several $million break. It's not enough to really keep anybody in business. So the tax laws are hugely important to us, and we shaken our boots when the wrong person gets into office. Regarding the board governance, it's those laws are changing all the time, and they change with each organization. The governance laws are different, so I'm not sure how I would really answer that question for you.
I was particularly interested in the recent code of governance that's come out in the UK. Some of the practices around the size of boards, the diversity of boards, etc., don't resonate with some of the things you said in terms of having an 80-person board sitting on a board for 20 years. So I'm just curious as to whether there were. We don't have size requirements in the governance. The first one that's really changed is the mayor saying that we have to be racially diverse. But we're not governed by size at all. So a small organization could have a 30-person board or a 5-person board. I'm on the World Science Foundation board, and there are 5 of us. And there have been, since we started 10 years ago, there have been 5 of us. But we're 5 worker bees, so it works. Yes.
Hello, Jennifer Smith. I'm the general manager at Loughborough Festival Opera, which is a small opera house about 45 minutes away from here. So lovely to hear from you. It's about something that you actually talked about a second ago, which was, kind of setting the budget, and then there are these targets, and the trustees go out and do some of that kind of fundraising and individual support and working with that. Is that something that is quite common practice with trustees, that they have that role to be doing that as part of, in relation to kind of maybe the general manager as well? Because at the moment I don't particularly have trustees who do that, and it's interesting to know if all the trustees that are kind of recruited, that sort of fundraising element and developing those relationships is kind of common practice.
It's a lot easier in America because, as I said earlier, it really is a tradition for us, and it's in our DNA. And when you're recruiting, it's difficult. It goes back to a question before. When you change your laws that you want, and you want people to have to make donations, that's when you run into trouble. But when you're deciding on who you want to be on that board, you have to have those discussions up front. And it's...
I suppose the question isn't about your own personal giving, it's about you representing the Met and chatting to that person to say,
Well, I would make it very clear if I wanted someone to be involved, what the requirements are. We have a young associates, the requirement is $25,000 a year. If I'm interviewing one of them, I let them know up front that that's the financial requirement. And we had someone that joined 2 years ago, and the second year they never gave the money, and we wrote and we called and we wrote and we called, and they couldn't do it anymore, and you have to ask them to be off the board. But you need to have that conversation in the very beginning before they join your board, and you have to let them know, yes, it's part of the requirement. With all of these boards, it's the financial health and the governance of the organization that that is part of your job as a trustee or as a board member. But you have to have the right conversations and detailed conversations before that person gets on the board, so they'll understand what you want from them. And that's an individual, but it's basically the same conversation for whatever organization. If you want to get 10 new board members, you should have the same conversation with each one of those people you're recruiting, so there are no surprises later. They need to know what's expected of them. Yes.
Hi, my name's Ariane. I'm from Australia. I'm an MBA student here. I was interested in something you mentioned when you were talking earlier about wanting to increase not just the diversity of the board, but the diversity of the audiences. And I'm particularly interested in how you balance this kind of broader, overarching goals against I guess, the position of the board. So how involved is the board in making decisions or initiatives that pursue that goal, and how do you balance that against other things such as wanting to respect the artistic integrity of the artistic directors and not being involved with their decisions?
I think you never want to compromise the artistic integrity. I know that some opera houses are now showing, and very terrific opera houses, are showing musical theater. But for the purpose of something like the Metropolitan Opera, for us to show musical theater would compromise our artistic goals. So I think you can't compromise that, but, and I think you have to be very strict with that. But in order to get new audiences, you have to have less expensive tickets, and I know Mariusz is doing this with the Oxford Philharmonic. He has student price tickets. We have $25 tickets to the Met, and every night there are at least 100 tickets that are sold for just $25. You try to go into schools and promote yourself in schools, any kind of classical performing arts, whether it's ballet or the symphony or the opera. Try to have your educational programs in the schools, because that expands your audience. But that's one of the biggest, talking about the audience, that's one of the biggest problems that all of the classical performing arts are experiences in America today. Yes.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I've very much appreciated it. I'm Tori Hellrung from Montreal in Canada and an MBA student at the moment as well. And I'm curious, throughout your career, how have you developed your skills and invested in yourself to become a better leader and a chairwoman in the role you are in?
Like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. I mean, the example of me being able to start with a small organization like the Rainforest Alliance was and I had no idea in the mid-'80s that I was going to ever have a visible position. It was not part of what I wanted to do with my life. But the training that I got from that and understanding how to run an organization. And then I joined the board of a bigger organization, and then I started being recruited, same last name, good last name, and they wanted a Ziff on the board. And each time I went, I gained experience. And I think maybe I was lucky enough to have a super smart husband who helped train me along the way. But I'm not sure you can train yourself for that. I think you just have to do it by trial and error and experience and find out what you're good at and what you're not good at. One of the things, this is a little digression, that I really found out was how incapable so many people were. And so I was really shocked by this. I'm in, one of the greatest cities in the world with really smart, educated people on the boards, and some of them just couldn't do anything. So that in itself, when I was starting out, I thought, boy, I can do that better than they can. That was a real learning experience for me. Yes.
I'm Michael Earle. I used to be in the business school. I'm a trustee of Mariusz's Philharmonic, Oxford Philharmonic, but I don't give $250,000 a year or anything like it.
Maybe you should.
More importantly, now I chair the Oxford Centre for the Study of Philanthropy. And we make a distinction between philanthropy on the one hand and development or advancement or fundraising on the other. And many of your insights have been on the fundraising side, on the taking side. I wonder whether you had any thoughts about where there might be difference if you're sitting on the board of the giving side. Imagine on the Rockefeller Foundation or the Gates Foundation.
I think a lot of organizations are always going to these foundations for funds, and I think you just have to know exactly what's going on in that foundation, what they're interested in giving to. And I think if you're on that foundation, you follow the goals of what the foundation was set up for. And then if one of the proposals that you're getting fits in, you give them the money. I mean, I'm always on the other side. I'm not giving it away unless it's mine, so I haven't been involved with any of that. But you really have to believe in the organization you're giving the money to. Yes.
So 2 days ago, Lincoln Center announced that it would scrap a $500 million capital improvement on Geffen Hall. This has to be one of the bigger decisions that the Lincoln Center management and board would have made. Can you give us a sense of how a decision like that is made and the role of the board in that decision?
Maybe just a few sentences of background. Since I've been on the board of Lincoln Center for over 20 years, we started thinking about that project when Beverly Sills was still alive. So it's the 97, 98. So it was a constant discussion and lots of plans going on. When we finally decided that after the renovation of Lincoln Center, which was $1.2 billion, and the Philharmonic was not part of that, some of the powers that be decided that the Philharmonic would have this big project. And unfortunately, the time when that committee decided on that and started moving ahead and getting architectural plans, the Philharmonic lost its chairman and Lincoln Center lost its president, and the Philharmonic lost its artistic director, conductor. And one big organization's going on in the direction that everybody wanted at one time, and then new people come in. And the other thing that happened was that the escalation of what it was going to cost went up radically. In the late 90s, it was supposed to be $385 million. And then it got to 400, 450, 500. It's mentioned as 500, but at one time it was 750 and $800 million. And that's for a concert hall. And when all of the new management came in, conversations had to start all over again with them. And I think it might have been the same with any situation when new management comes in. And it was a very long, arduous summer. But I think everybody ended up agreeing, everybody on both sides, after tough conversations, and they should be tough. You're on two different sides of an issue, and they're always tough. But everybody ended on the same page, and we want a better sounding hall, but we don't need to have the most glamorous new building in the world, especially because finances are tough in New York City. A number of other projects have been canceled at the same time. And there may be 100 people, I don't know what the number is, but there are 100 names on the top of the list of everybody that everyone is going to money for. And everybody's getting donor fatigue. It's a real problem with a lot of organizations now, because they're going back to the same people. And no matter how much money you have, it's enough already. But it ended up, luckily, turning out okay for that.
And we're nearly at the end of our time. So if you'd like to take one or two more questions, then maybe we should.
Okay.
My name's Charlotte. I'm also an MBA student. So two very quick questions. I'd love to hear how you gauge whether a prospective board member will be effective and engaged after they've checked all the boxes on the requirements for a board member. And second, what is your favorite place to power schmooze in New York?
Oh. I'll answer the second one first. I would always pick a place that other people don't go to. I don't want to go and be seen anywhere, so it's usually a small, quiet place, and if I mention the place I go to, you'd never heard of it. With the first question, you don't know. Someone joins a board and you have a lot of hope, and they can also say, yes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to support a production, and frequently you're very disappointed. I mean, and that's when you have to get people off a board. You usually let them run out their term. Sometimes it's a 2-year or a 3-year term. But you try to engage them as much as you can, and some people talk a good game and they just don't want to be involved. So that's one of the problems in then getting them off the board. One more question.
Martin Smith, I've had a number of business interests and also interest in the arts, including I was chair of the second largest opera company in the UK, English National Opera. for a while, and I'm on the board of Glyndebourne, and I chair an orchestra and various other things. The comment that I picked up that I thought was rather interesting that you made was that you can't really train for these kinds of roles. And I wonder whether that's really true, and Peter and I think have touched on this once or twice, but I think in America, is it not the case that there are in business schools and also in undergraduate schools opportunities to learn about arts administration and the issues involved in, taking Peter's words, looking at these enterprises as businesses as well as purely arts organizations, which I think we all understand is what's needed. I just wonder whether that statement is correct. Are you seeing people who have actually had some training, and slightly throwing the gauntlet down to Peter, is there an opportunity in a place like the Surrey Business School to create programs that will enable people to learn how these organizations work and perhaps be more useful to people like the Met and people like English National Opera in the future?
I think that a number of American universities have courses for that now. They really have programs of arts administration. They also have courses in fundraising. And I think this is a much younger population. The people that we're getting on our boards have not gone to any of those classes, but it might be in 10 years' time that we're going to see a lot of people coming out who know how to do those things. No one ever taught me how to fundraise. And I'll digress one more minute, and I know we're out of time, but when they were recruiting me to be chairman of the Met, one of the questions was, can you fundraise? And I said, I really don't fundraise. I could never ask for money because I knew they could ask, knowing my husband, they could ask me for the same amount of money back, and then so I just never asked. But I did say that if I really love and believe in something, I can sell whatever it is, and that's what fundraising really is. You tell them how much you love this university or Glyndebourne or whatever it is, and that's what fundraising is all about. You have to sell your story. And I think they're teaching that in some schools now, some more progressive schools. It's important. We all need it. Thank you very much. It's really been an honor to be here.
Really insightful comments. We don't yet, Martin, have a program, although with the Lindberry Trust we'll have students coming in who are interested in the arts, and we'll be doing more there. But what I'd like to do is invite everybody to a small reception outside, and please join Ann again, thanking her for her time here.